Hello and welcome to Mr. Hines' Assassin's Creed Odyssey walkthroughs on sanctuary sites in ancient Greece. In this episode we'll be looking at the Sanctuary of Athena on top of the Athenian Acropolis. Athens is actually located in a region of Greece known as Attica, a region which Athens controlled entirely, and this actually made it one of the biggest city-states in the entire Greek world. The Acropolis itself is actually located right in the centre of the city of Athens. In fact, the Athenians built up around the Acropolis itself. The Acropolis is this high, tall, flat rock on which the sanctuary is built. And the word Acropolis comes from the Greek acro, which means high, and polis, which means city. So it's known as the high city, and indeed there's evidence of people actually living up there well before the Athenians got on the scene. So, the Acropolis was the Athenians' very own sanctuary to Athena. And unlike other sanctuaries that we've seen which were more pan-Hellenic, such as Delphi and Olympia for example, the Acropolis was mainly used by the Athenians. That's not to say that visitors couldn't come up to the Acropolis and worship Athena. They certainly could. The Athenians wanted them to, not only so that they could worship Athena, but also so they could show off a lot about themselves. But mainly, this was practically used by the Athenians on a more day-to-day basis. Now, the sanctuary itself was actually destroyed in about 479 BC when the Persians sacked Athens during the Persian invasions. But the Athenians weren't here. They'd actually relocated to the island of Salamis because they wanted to take the fight to the Persians on the water, fighting with their superior navy. So when Xerxes got here, none of the Athenians were here, but instead he decided to destroy all the monuments and buildings up here. Now, the Athenians initially, after the Greeks had won the Persian invasions, left the ruins up here as sort of a monument of their sacrifice during the Persian invasions. However, in 449 BC, the Athenian statesman Pericles decided that they should actually rebuild the buildings and monuments here. A, to honour Athena, obviously, but B, to do it in such a style that it really showed off the Greeks in a very ostentatious way, saying a lot about their status and their wealth. Therefore, Pericles decided to put through this building program known as the Periclean Building Program, and all the buildings on top of the Acropolis that we now see were built in somewhere in the region of 447 to 431 BC. And interestingly, actually, as the game shows, not all the buildings could be quite finished off. There's certain things left, like bits of scaffolding or bits of the stones needing to be smoothed off. And the Athenians had to cease construction on some of the major buildings and divert their attention and funds elsewhere, because in 431 BC, the Peloponnesian War was kicking off, which was Athens versus her allies and Sparta versus her allies. So they couldn't spend so much money. So as you can see there on the Temple of Athena, Nike up in the top right still has scaffolding on because it's still being rebuilt. Now, one of the first buildings that we come across when we look on the Acropolis is this monumental gateway over here, and this was called the Propylaea. Now, there's always been a gateway at this point, right since the Mycenaean times, however, not one of such a high and ornate standard. This original gateway actually had to be redesigned from the plan. The reason for this is building on a high, tall, flat rock means that you have quite limited space, and as a result, the now to our left-hand section of it, room of it had to be shortened. It was meant to be a lot bigger than this. Nevertheless, it's built entirely out of marble, and it's quite a statement piece. In fact, a massive procession always takes place every 4 years, called the Great Parthenon, which is where from just over in the coast there, over at Piraeus, a big procession takes place in honour of Athena and ends and culminates on top of the Acropolis, outside the Erechtheion, and it's a big sacrifice in honour to Athena, and the procession comes through this gateway here, and it's a huge procession. It's got animals for sacrifice. It's got people just wanting to come to the Parthenon. You've got musicians. You've got generals. You've got water carriers. It's a massive procession. So it needs to be big enough to let all of this come through quite easily. Now, when we come out of the Propylaea and stand roughly about this point here, you'll notice that we can see all the major buildings of the Acropolis, of the sanctuary site. Over here on the left, ignoring the statue just for a moment, you have a temple called the Erechtheion, which is the first temple that we're going to look at. Over here, to the right of that, you have the most famous temple in the Greek world, probably, the Parthenon. And back over here you have the proper line. Now, if we were to extend even higher up, you would notice that if we linked all of those points together, it would make a triangle. And triangle is actually a rudimentary one of the more primitive, earlier symbols of Athena. So what that tells us is that the temple has been, and the sanctuary site, sorry, and the temples around the sanctuary site have been built in such a way, been really thought out in a way that they honour Athena. And they say something about her. It's all in reference to her. And the fact that from standing at this point you can see all the major buildings again shows us how well thought out the design of this whole sanctuary has been. If we actually look at the Parthenon over there as well, you'll notice that that's actually the back view of the Parthenon, and in its design they've decided to leave the front around the other side so that you're sort of building up your excitement and your anticipation of seeing what the temple would have actually looked like as you go around. Now, one of the things that we obviously can't ignore is this massive temple statue to Athena, and this is Athena in her role as Promachos, Athena who fights on the front line, Promachos being at the front of the line. It's this colossal bronze statue constructed by the famous sculptor called Phidias. Now, as Demosthenes is saying there, Athena is the goddess of wisdom and war, and this is honouring Athena and as goddess in her role as goddess, a protector of the city, but also ready to fight and defend and take the fight to the enemy should it be needed. Different to Ares because she's wisdom and tactics in war rather than violence in war. Now, the first temple, and probably one of the most unusual temples in the whole Greek world, to be honest, is this temple called the Erechtheon. And it's unusual for two reasons, one of which is its function, and second of all is its design. We'll talk about its architecture first. So as you can see, if we just look at this section of the temple, it follows a normal sort of nails design with its front porch. However, as we go around it, we also notice that it has other porchways. For example, on the south side here, we have a really small porch with these Erechtheon maidens on there, with these caryatid maidens on there. And as we come around here, we notice on the north side it has another porch as well, and we also have one at the front. And we also notice that it's built on different levels. In fact, if you remember, I came down some stairs and go up some stairs over here. It's built on an uneven surface. Now that's part of the problem of building on a natural feature like this rock up here. But it also definitely bucks conventions of the time. This isn't usual for temples to be built like this. But perhaps that also reflects the different porches and their different levels perhaps reflect its quirky nature. Because while at first it is a temple that is dedicated to Athena, and here we have a statue of Athena if we go into it, although this statue isn't quite right, it should be a small wooden statue, not a big bronze or golden statue as we have here. This was the statue that's actually addressed in a great big peplos during the Parthenon. But we would expect a statue of Athena to be in there, being that this is a sanctuary site of Athena, but we also have, if we come further down into the other room, a statue to Poseidon. Now remember, this is a sanctuary site dedicated to Athena, and this also therefore reflects the odd sort of nature of the temple itself, because this temple was actually built in honour of both gods. The reason for this is because it's referencing the patronage contest between Athena and Poseidon. So both gods wanted to be patron god of a city, and they liked this region, so they went to the inhabitants. Athena offered them an olive tree, allegedly this olive tree that I'm flying over right now, and Poseidon offered a salt spring. Now obviously a salt spring is not very useful, can't drink from it, can't use it for much, so the Athenians went with the olive tree, and therefore Athens got its name from the goddess Athena. But to honour that sort of patronage contest and to also not annoy Poseidon, they've put a statue to him in there as well. But that doesn't really explain its name, the Erechtheon. That's not got anything to do with Athena, that doesn't really sound like it's got much to do with Poseidon, but actually it's named after one of the legendary mythological kings, Erechtheus, as well, so that's where it gets its name, the Erechtheon. Now, as we walk around the Erechtheon, we can also see these huge stairs and an altar right on the top. Now, most people would expect probably the altar to be outside the Parthenon. That's where a massive sacrifice would take place. But that's not actually the case. After the great Panathenaea, that all-Athenian festival in which all the Athenians thanked Athena for being their patron goddess, they would come in that massive procession from outside Piraeus over there. They'd walk all the way through Greece, come through the Propylaea, and that's why the Propylaea is built in such a way that it can take a massive procession coming through here without causing too much of a traffic jam. And it would end, the culmination of this festival would end right in front of the Erechtheion here, to give thanks to Athena as protector of the city, Athena Polias, and that's why the statue in there, that small, should be wooden statue, is called Athena Polias, and part of the ceremony of that is dressing her in this huge ornamental peplos clothing to say thank you to her. And the sacrifice would take place up here, so we'd have the priests that would sacrifice the animals, check the entrails for any bad omens, and if everything was okay, they'd proceed with the sacrifice. They'd burn a thigh bone wrapped in fat, and that would be the offering to Athena and the other gods, and they would then share out the rest of the meat, sacrificial meat, and everyone would take part in it all together. But after you've been to the Erechtheion, the next and probably most famous building, not only on top of the Acropolis, but also in the whole Greek world, probably in terms of temples at least, is this temple to Athena, the Parthenon. Now the Parthenon gets its name from Athena Parthenos. That means Athena the Virgin, so named because she had a virgin birth. The idea is that she was split from Zeus's head as he had a headache by Hephaestus' hammer. Thus Parthenos means virgin. The Parthenon celebrates Athena as the virgin goddess. Now this is the major focal point, this temple, of the entire sanctuary, and as I said, it's probably one of the most famous temples in the entire Greek world. It's the largest and it's the most ornate. It was actually built to outdo the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. Its date of construction was from about 447 to 432 BC, and it was again made entirely out of marble, but it also had embellishments in other precious metals as well. The architects for this were Ectinus and Callicrates, and also the famous sculptor Phidias oversaw the decoration both internally and externally. Now I said it was big, it's about 70 metres by 30 metres in dimension. That's huge for these Greek temples. As we can see from its decoration, it has pediments on both sides. It has these square slabs called metopes that run along the front as well. And it's a Doric temple because of that. Now what Doric means is basically that, in terms of architectural design at least, is that you have these wide, thick-set columns with none of those scrolls at the top of the abacus up there. But also, as I said, you've got these metopes or metopes. These are square slabs that are broken up by these triglyphs here, and they're sculpted panels. Now, all the metopes in the game show the labours of Heracles, but that's not what was actually shown in the Parthenon. The Parthenon showed 4 different scenes. Firstly, the centaurs fighting against the Lapiths, the Theseus fighting against the Amazonians. You also had the gods versus the giants, and finally you also had the Trojan War on there as well, and these scenes would run along, each side would show one of those different conflicts, so that's what makes it Doric, with these broken metopes broken up by triglyphs. There's also sculpted pediments on both sides. Again, the game is just filling this with generic sort of scenes, and various different things from mythology, but actually in reality the 2 pediments showed the birth of Athena, and also showed the patronage contest between her and Poseidon. Now we can actually go inside this temple and get a bit more of a view of its decoration, and what the game displays here is also, I said it was a Doric temple, but it also has what's known as Ionic Features, and the Ionic feature really is a continuous frieze that runs along, and in reality the frieze would have run along all 4 sides of the temple. Now the frieze was a sculpted continuous panel, and this is painted, but it would have actually been sculpted, and what this actually shows is the scene of the Panathenaea, the procession from the Panathenaea that culminated just outside the Erechtheion there. and painted on here, but sculpted in reality, and it would have shown all sorts of the actual sculpture shows all sorts of scenes like the gods being there as well, along to the up to the Eric Them through the proper line. If we go inside the temple, into the inner room, the nails, which actually, interestingly, most people didn't come into the temples. That was reserved mainly for the priests and their upkeep of it. Most people stayed outside the temple, which is why Greek temples are so decorated externally, usually, and quite bare inside. But this is the Parthenon, so no expense has been spared inside as well. Now, most temples, have a cult statue of the god or goddess that they honour, and there's no exception in here. We have, however, something a little different. We do have a cult statue to Athena, but it's what's known as a chryselephantine statue. That means it's made out of gold and ivory, just to really show off that expense and the money that Athens has got there. So it's a real statement piece as well. This was constructed by Phidias, but again has been lost to us now, as many of these chryselephantine statues have been. So that's the key features of the Parthenon. But if we're just to walk up here, on the left-hand side of the Acropolis, as we're looking at it now, you'll notice that there's a massive theatre down here as well. And that's because we know the Greeks love their theatrical plays. There was another festival that took place on the side of the Acropolis called the City Dionysia, and this was a theatrical contest in honour of Dionysus, the god of theatre, among other things, in which tragic, comedic and satyr plays were performed and judged in competition, and this was actually open for people to come to from all over the Greek world, and after viewing the plays here and celebrating the City Dionysia, they would then walk up, as we did, up the Acropolis and visit the sanctuary site up here, yes, to probably give thanks to Athena, but also to sort of act as tourists really, and see what the Athenians had been spending their money on. So again, this is why Athens pours so much money into their building of this sanctuary site, because they know it's going to be a statement about who they are and say a lot about their identity. So those are the major sort of buildings that we need to look at inside the sanctuary site. But there's also one temple that's left that we haven't looked at, that's actually outside the walls of the sanctuary itself, and that is known as the Temple of Athena Nike. Athena, the goddess of victory, in this guise here. Now the reason why it's outside the walls of the sanctuary is because there's not really enough room to get it in, despite it being such a small temple. There wasn't really enough room to put it in, and as you can see, it's still being constructed in the game, so its date of construction does come down to about 431 BC, and by this point there's so many buildings and monuments in there that it's actually probably better that it goes on the outside. Now, despite it being a smaller temple, it's very ornate. It's built entirely out of marble, and it's actually Ionic, so it's got that continuous frieze running all the way alongside. And there was also small figurines of Nike, Athena's the goddess of victory, going all the way around it. There was even a sculpted railing, apparently, that ran, called a balustrade, that went all alongside it as well to stop people from falling off the propeller, which also had small figurines of Athena, Nike on there as well. But one of the reasons why I picked this temple out as well is because the view from it really tells us a lot about the rest of Athens. You can see some really important monuments of the rest of the city from here. So, firstly, you can see right out to the coast, because Athens is right on the coast, right on the shoreline, and from it you can see certain islands. You can see Salamis just over there, where the Athenians had sacrificed their city and then took a naval battle to the Persians in 480 BC, during the Battle of Salamis, that later helped them win the Persian invasions. But we can also see really important things more local to the Athenians. For example, you can see this rock over here with a flat sort of top over there, and there's actually a prison down here, and that's because this was a law court. It's called the Areopagus Court, took place over here, where people would be tried for murder up here. It gets its name because it's thought to be Areopagus. It's thought to be the rock of Ares, where Ares was actually tried and judged for killing Poseidon's son. And so you've got the prison down there. Another important hill that you can see from the Acropolis is an area here called the Pnyx, and this is where basically all Athenian citizens came to meet in an assembly, and their voices were heard, and policies were ratified up here, and decisions and and issues raised by a council called the Bouleuteron were discussed up here, and all Athenian male citizens could have their vote and their say on politics over here. As we fly around as well, we can see all sorts of other things. I could do a whole video on just from this aerial view of things that we could see in Athens, but one of the more interesting things to talk about is this little boat that's being constructed down here, and this was actually used in the city Dionysia, where a statue of Dionysus was put on it, and it was put on wheels, and it was ramped up, and people would then fly over, we're flying over where it would come up the pathway up to the Acropolis, and then it would go to the theatre of Dionysus in terms of celebrating the city Dionysia. And there's all sorts of other buildings and temples that we can see from here, but I think we've covered most of the key features of the sanctuary of Athena on top of the Acropolis. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it.